The Port Podcast with Craig Bell Estabrooks.
And now it's my pleasure to introduce the Honourable Jim Quinn from the Senate of Canada and Craig Estabrooks, CDO of Port St. John. They're going to come and we're gonna film a live podcast. And I'm told that this is to help give the port to sort of the visibility and the understanding. I've been enjoying your podcast, Craig. And it's they come across my feeds all the time. It's so wonderful to see the port integrating with the people of St. John and be cursed. So, Craig, Jim.
That's going to be about the funniest photo of us you could put up there. Neither of us are that serious in real life. Well, this is 15 years in the making. I get to grill Jim Quinn right on stage, and he's live. There's nothing you can do about it.
And it's unrehearsed.
And it's unrehearsed. We got no questions. He called me last night. I'm flying back from Ottawa. He flew in this morning, so he's fresh off the plane. And we were just talking about what we're going to talk about. And I said, "You don't get any advance warning. This is my opportunity to chat." But thank you everyone for coming today. What we wanted to do was film a podcast live. So this is the first time we've ever done this. We've been 2 years bringing in thought leaders in the maritime industry, local politicians, local industry leaders, and we've had a lot of success telling a more nuanced story and going in a little deeper than you'd get in the traditional media sense. And we've had a lot of really positive feedback, and I think that's going to be a continuation today. I just want to note that yesterday's podcast release was with Andrew Dixon. And I really view today our opportunity to engage and talk a little bit about projects we worked on and what you're working on now in the Senate involves Andy as well. And if you look at all of it together, I'd just like to say on a serious note, I had the opportunity of a lifetime 14 years ago getting hired at the port to work with these two gentlemen and to dream big. And we're still doing that today. And so if you watch that podcast with Andy, I think it's very insightful. And what Jim and I are going to create on stage today will hopefully equal that. And we'll really be able to get a total picture of how this crazy infrastructure project came to be a decade plus ago.
Well, it's a bit of a competition is what you're telling me, Andy and I.
It was always a competition, so we're just ramping it up here a little bit. So. Excellent. Well, welcome everyone, and welcome Senator Quinn.
And thanks, Craig. And I think that the first thing I should do is say thank you to the Seafarers and to Craig and to all involved for inviting me to be here. I was part of the Seafarers for a long time. And I really believe in the work that they do. A great summary of the overview that Eric gave, and Tony's doing a fantastic job, but so are the volunteers, Serene, Paul, and everybody who's been involved. It's so great to see the next generation involved. And so I just want to give a shout out to all of them, and I think we should give them a round of applause.
Well said. That's perfect. Well, let's dive right in. I mean, I think a lot of people in this room could probably recite your bio and background. You worked on vessels in this harbor. You got a tremendous family connection. You worked your way through the federal government all the way to the CFO, and then joined us as president and CEO back in 2010. I had the pleasure of starting to work with you just a year after that in 2011. So we know your tremendous passion and experience in this port, but I want to zero in on the early days of how you and your leadership team, Andy and others, started dreaming big about infrastructure and getting us back in the game.
Well, I guess to be perfectly honest, I used to sail in and out of this port in Coast Guard ships and on the Irving tankers. And my family's very involved in the port. I used to hang out on the pilot boat as a kid because my dad and my uncle were pilots. And this port was always a buzz. There was always something going on. And when I left St. John to do other things, and I used to come back with my kids all the time, I'd come across the Harbor Bridge and look down, and I'd see not much of anything happening. And I always said to myself that I'd love to have the opportunity someday to put this port back to where it was, that is on the global trade map. So I just had that feeling. I talked about it a lot with my family and things like that. And then I had that opportunity in 2010. It's like the guy upstairs has a plan for all of us. And that plan was fulfilled when I got this job. And fortunately, I encountered just a tremendous group of people to work with. And it really came down to looking what was going on in the shipping world. And we had to make a decision. We were either going to be in the game or not in the game. And I know that Andy and I had many discussions about it, and Andy was working very hard to promote and get things done. But the port had just become a Canadian Port Authority, and before that, it had been an appropriated sort of department of government. And maybe the drive wasn't there, but the reality is things had changed. And so we just decided that we needed to get back in the game. And actually, Craig, I think you said I just have to say hello and then I'll just keep going.
But my joke earlier, I just have to say hello. Jim's going to do the rest.
Yeah. But the day that it all came to be had been like I kept thinking about what is it we need to do here. And so I walked into Paula Copeland's office, and Paula, I think it was a napkin or whatever, the old story, and I had all these circles drawn. And I said, Paula, can you make sense of this, make it look good? Because it was telling a story about the things that we needed to do. And we knew we had to get a world-class terminal operator. We knew we had to get an international shipping line. We knew we had to get CP back in town. We had to put St. John back to where it was. And nothing had changed, really. Our geographic position hadn't changed. None of the basics had changed, but the dynamics had changed. And we didn't have people who believed that this port had a rightful place in the container world, quite frankly.
It's too bad, Paul, we didn't save some of those napkins. They'd be lovely art upstairs to show the progression of history.
Yeah, I may have it. But anyway, that's kind of where it all began and how it came to be. And just a lot of determination and doggedness and taking on a lot of people who were non-believers and taking some risk.
Well, let's dive into the risk piece, because in the podcast with Andy, he described very well how the kind of the loose design of the modernization came, and then you and I get to work after that period a lot in the 2014 to 2016 period about how we go about securing the funds through the Build Canada Fund, the federal government, the provincial government. Tell us about your strategy and what you were trying to do, because the economic case, not as strong as it is today, but we still managed to pull it off.
Well, yeah, in fact, when I was hired, there was three things the board asked me to do, one of which was to get money from Ottawa. Because I come from Ottawa as a chief financial officer. I was very familiar with how the town worked and things of that nature. And so first you have to have something to go for. So we had a West Side modernization. And then you had to brief people. You had to keep everybody advised. So we kept Fredericton advised, no matter what the government was, whether it was a Liberal or Conservative. We did the same thing in Ottawa. And then I went to town talking to folks in the bureaucracy who are decision makers. And our challenge was this, is St. John was nowhere on the horizon. It was all about Halifax. We had an Atlantic gateway, and it wasn't an Atlantic gateway, it was a Halifax gateway. The entire focus of the Department of Transport and other departments was on Halifax. And there was no room for us, so we had to make room. And so we did a lot of lobbying, a lot of making elbow space, sort of putting elbows up, I guess. But so that we went about it that way, and we came up with our business case, and it went through heavy scrutiny, but fortunately, I went through the process and came out the other end, having been accepted. And it sounds easy, but it took a lot of work and dogged determination and time.
Nothing was easy. I remember the moment you turned to Krista Foster and I, who's our controller, and we committed to $68.3 million as a part of the original $205 million, with no full plan on how we were going to pay for our own $68.32 million. But we did it. We did it. And did it very well and came out on the other end with a lot more money than we thought we did. So that it's an interesting, we take kind of moments on the podcast. We try to, as we bring in thought leaders like yourself in, you mentioned risk. And that's what I want to pick up on. Obviously, that was a riskier project than others that were occurring in the country. How did you package the risk profile of what was being done appropriately?
I think what we did was we took the facts. Fact was, MSC started to call on the port in 2012, in May of 2012. Annie, I'm still waiting for you to kiss the hull of one of those MSC ships. But in any case, we had an international shipping line come in. Business was starting to go up. We were a successful port in other areas, oil products, potash, things of that nature. And so we were building the foundations of what success looked like. And we put a plan and made projections about this is what we're going to do and this is how we're going to do it. Another key element was, we took the risk, in a way, of putting our tender out for the management of the terminal over there. And that was a big risk. We were going to upset a lot of people. But quite frankly, we went, I guess I can say this, we went from a company that was sweating the assets and not investing in the port and not doing any of the marketing or business development that would normally take place. That was all on Andy's shoulders. And so we were able to attract DP here. And that started in 2012, I think, too. When we went down and on a side meeting, Andy and I were on a mission to find cargo. We were looking for, I forget what we were looking for down. I know at one point we were looking for bananas. And it was the same in coffee. And we actually got a couple of container loads of coffee. I swear to God, we bought in ship after ship of coffee. But anyway, but we got DP World. We developed that relationship. They believed in what our vision was. And the head of DP at the time, Matt
Leach and Hope.
Matt Leach. And Matt Leach looked at us, and he looked at a guy named Michael Bentley, who got us in the room, so to speak. And he said, Michael, you watch these guys, stay in touch with them. And Michael did. And he came down here on a regular basis. And he saw what we were doing, and we captured DP's attention, and they put in a very well-written, well-thought-out, well-documented, and financial rewarding business case to take over our terminal. That played a big role in our Ottawa story.
I would say the thing, having a front row seat to this too, all of that is a major component. I enjoyed watching how you would take your former civil service colleagues outside of their comfort zone. I think that is a very understated reason why we got that funding, because I think you had a history of going against the grain in Ottawa, and they knew that. Every meeting I was in, it was like, oh, Jim Quinn, yeah, he really pushed us to do this and that, way outside their regular risk profile. I loved it. I think we need more of that in today's civil service in Fredericton and Ottawa. But I think you having that track record, they kind of looked at us and go, yeah, this project's a little out there, but if there's anyone that can do it.
Well, it's interesting because, and that is true. And but fortunately, I was a believer in building networks, and I always wanted to build networks with people that were younger than me, Craig. But in any case, because those are the leaders of the future. And most of the people I was dealing with, whether it be a Treasury Board, the Department of Finance, or in other areas, were people who had worked for me, worked with me. And they were really strong, brilliant people. And they tended to believe the things that I would say because I did the same thing in the government. I wasn't your typical public servant. I swam against the current most of the time, at risk, but things seemed to work out, and I think that had a lot to do with it as well. I think you're right.
Absolutely. So you talked earlier about bringing your family down back in the day, looking at the port, kind of inspired you to want to come back. Now, when you drive across the Harbor Bridge, what do you think when you see, kind of fast forward, we'll fill in a lot of blanks, but fast forward to 2025, what do you think when you see the finished product?
When I drive across the Harbor Bridge, I feel a sense of absolute pride. I'm proud of our port. I'm proud of our community. One of the things we had to do was we wanted to get the city of St. John, the residents of St. John, to recognize their port. For those of us who are a little bit older, I was going to say Andy, but he's a little younger than I. But in any case, I think. But anyway, we used to listen to the radio. They'd be calling out the crews to go work, gangs to go work the port, and the place is just a hopping. But we had lost that connection. I honestly believe, when I got here, we had lost the connection between port and city. And I'd been at a conference at the Association of American Port Authorities. I got very involved with that, and I learned a lot from that I was able to apply here. And there was a port of Baltimore and the port of Philadelphia, both port cities. And I remember a presentation where the people of Philadelphia would say, we have a port. But in Baltimore, they would say, our port, let me tell you about our port. And I was hell-bent and determined to make sure that as many people in St. John would know as much about this port so they could say, I know about the port, let me tell you about it. And I think we built some success there because you have to have your community on board. You have to have them enthralled and excited about what you're trying to achieve. And that builds a momentum as well.
Yeah, it still strikes me to this day. You probably have the same experience that people stop you and say, "I've got a new family connection that is working on the waterfront with DP World, with maybe they're part of the Longshore Union," and then they get into immediately a story about a parent, a grandparent, some relative that had a connection. I think that the work that you did early days and now the job growth, that's occurred as a result of that has really cemented that connection, because it's the employment and that I think has really taken this to the next level.
I think you're right, Craig, and it's very true. I mean, I got to go uptown today, and I'm sure somebody's going to stop, and it happens all the time, and they'll say, "Oh, you're Jim, blah blah blah," and they talk about their son or daughter who's working at the port or wants to work at the port, and I encourage them, follow that pursuit, because this is a great place to work. There's so many jobs around this port. It's not just about the Port Authority.
Not at all, no.
I mean, the Port Authority is an important piece of it, but the majority of the jobs are not the Port Authority jobs. They're the Longshore, the Atlantic Towing, the DP Worlds, the JDIs. There are so many employers here, and there's so many jobs tied to this port that it's a real boom for our economy, not only locally, but provincially.
Well, your family connection, the pilots have grown tremendously and have become the heart of the operation here too. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
So you talked earlier about one specific company. I know it's dangerous when there's a page full of sponsors, but I do want to just talk a little bit about CP as you described it, and CPKC, because you've described a lot about the history and that family connection. I also get a lot of, I had a relative that worked at CPR, as they were known back then, because they were a major employer. I remember when they announced, it was the fall of 2019, almost Christmas time 19, right before the pandemic, that they were going to reclaim a presence in St. John. And that's not something we talked a little bit about it, but we weren't allowed to talk a lot about that way back. What in that moment, how did you feel that was going to change the trajectory, even though we hadn't even started the infrastructure project yet?
So a little background. We first talked to CP, and they were interested. They did a trial run with one container, and you swear to God, they sent down a unit train of containers through the state of Maine. In fact, we lost one of our shipping lines because of that trial, and or very much strongly linked to that. And then they did a second thing, and then a third occasion, I was over at an event on the other side of town. And I got a call from one of our leaders at JDI, and asked if I could come to a meeting with CP, and they wanted to come and meet at the port. And CN, I'm not sure if CP or CN are in the room, but I said, "Look, I've got a girlfriend here in town. It's called CN. I'd rather have a blind date with you guys up at your office and talk to CP." And when I went in, there was two of the senior guys who were still there in the company, and they asked about modernization, what we were doing, and they talked about the MMA, and they said, "What's your opinion? What's your advice?" And I remember taking the risk. I looked at them and said, "Well, unless you have a vision, unless you have the courage and are willing to take a risk, don't do it." It was that simple for me. And I remember Jim Irving just about falling on the floor. But in
The live podcast, by the way.
Yeah,
Jim.
but that's okay. He'll remember that meeting, I'm sure. But and he also knows me, so he'll understand. But in any case, they purchased the rail line, and of course, the next big step was Kansas City.
And then Hapag-Lloyd followed.
And then Hapag-Lloyd coming in, and
a lot of people forget that, or don't know, because it's not, it's so long ago. Hapag-Lloyd Canada, the Canadian division, is formerly CP Rail Ships.
That's right.
So when you visit the Hapag-Lloyd office in Montreal, you see all the beautiful, vessels, the kind of miniature version of the vessels right at the entrance as you come in.
Yeah, and I got to say, the fact that Hapag made the CMA come in as well, when we lost that other line, within 9 months. The magic of DP World and their connections were key to having CMA start calling this port, and that was another big thing for us, and remains a big thing. But what you guys are doing now with Hapag and others, and the things that are downstream, phenomenal. It's like, I get really excited. I talk to Craig, and I hang up the phone, and I'm just full of energy because of the things that are going to be coming our way.
So now I got to throw, because we only have a few minutes left, I want to throw some numbers at you for you to reflect on.
Okay.
So the first modernization that we submitted in 2014, we got the approvals the summer of 16. We got there, you and Dominic LeBlanc and Premier Gallant announced it at the time. And so the original 205 was to have about 300,000 to 325,000 TEU capacity. That was that project. And then in 2022, we went forward. You were part of the application before you left for enhanced. That was another 42 million. That took us to 247 overall. That gets us to about 800,000 TEU capacity with those slips filled in. Now, DP World loves to push us and say we can do 1 million with some equipment upgrades. So we'll call it 800,000 to 1 million of capacity we have today. So next year, it is very, very possible that we hit the 300,000 that we thought we were, the 300,000 that we were planning for that original project.
And that's ahead of schedule. Oh, our plan didn't have that happening for a few years to the right.
I don't think it was told about 2040.
I think it was 2043.
If that. This is way ahead. So how do you feel about the fact that the risk that you took and that you thought about has now just compounded?
Well, I think that the risk we took is obvious in terms of its payoff, because the performance of this port is outstanding. I don't know of another port on the Eastern Seaboard that's doing what this port is doing in terms of percentage growth. And it's amazing. Finally, St. John is in the discussion at the national level when it comes to container ports. And you were just telling me that when in Ottawa a few weeks ago, whatever. St. John, we had to fight every inch of the way to get into any meeting to do with containers. We had to kind of really argue and fight our way in. And again, it was the old connections that people have from previous lives that got us in those rooms. You don't have to fight anymore. They're calling you to go to those meetings. And that is an accomplishment in the shipping world.
And the way I look at it too, you don't take that lightly. Like that is a privilege to be invited. So you try to really go there and make an impact, because, I get the question a lot. You probably did too. Why does your community seem so supportive? And it's the same answer to what you just raised, because we know what it looks like to not be invited, and we know what it looks like to have business taken away from us.
That's right.
And we are so hungry because of that.
That's right. And we don't forget.
We don't forget.
Yeah. So
yeah, and we love CPKC, but we remind them when they left too.
Yeah.
Because they were gone for a long time. They're back and they're strong. And CN, I don't know if anyone from CN's in the room, but obviously CN plays a huge role in this point too. And they're fully invested with potash. They move a great number of containers today. And then of course in the liquid bulk with the partners at Irving Oil. So we're so fortunate to have those rail lines here.
Yeah, and we are. And quite frankly, on the east coast of Canada, we're the only port that has those linkages to 3 Class 1, maybe even one could argue 4 maybe, but 3 Class 1 services at our doorstep, and we've got the fantastic partnership with JDI, and it's just a magic sauce, and it's working here, and there's no reason that it can't continue to work and grow.
Absolutely, well said. Two more quick themes before we let everyone go today. One is just about your current role. So you were appointed to the Senate in 2021. You've now had a lot of opportunity. You've had a lot of meaningful impact so far. What are some of the highlights of that journey so far?
Oh, the first 2 years was a drag, I can tell you that. I mean, I went back into a bureaucracy that I had left. And when I left, I thought the mainline bureaucracy was bad. And I used to do a lot of support. I worked at Privy Council office, and I used to shake my head about so much process, Well, the Senate redefines that. And so it's taken a couple of years. It took the first 2 years to kind of, to get over that. In fact, I drove my wife nuts. I kept saying, I think I've made the worst mistake of my life. And, but in any case, over that, really engaged now. And I think the most exciting things that I'm involved in right now are the Transportation and Communications Committee. I've been part of the steering committee of that. I've got a bill before the Senate. I've reintroduced the Shenectady Isthmus. By the way, the Shenectady Isthmus, I expect a lot of people in the room know this. Nobody knew where the Shenectady Isthmus was. A lot of us know maybe the Tantramar Marshes. That's the Shenectady Isthmus. But, my bill is declaring it to be to the general advantage of Canada. It's at risk of being flooded. And in fact, it's been breached a few times over the years, but minor breaches, but it's due for a significant breach which will wipe out the trade corridor, the communications corridor, all of the cultural aspects that are there, whether it's Aboriginal or Acadian. Think of the species at risk and all those things. And it passed in the Senate 55-10 in the last Parliament, went over the House, it died. And I reintroduced it, and it is having one monumental struggle. And I can sense, I know it's being taped, but unfortunately, I've got a number of my colleagues from New Brunswick who are kind of trying to not see it come out of the Senate. But fortunately, there's 100 senators there, so I just have to work harder to make sure that we get those folks on board, because it's an essential thing for trade. And I'll say one other thing, if I may, and that is that people have asked me, "You're from St. John. What the hell are you doing over in the Tantramar Marsh? Like, why are you bothered with that? And you were the CEO of the Port of St. John. If Nova Scotia became an island, wouldn't that be good for business here?" And I said, well, if I was the CEO of Port St. John, I'm going to be there with a shovel to try and get to breach the dikes sooner. But the fact is, I'm a New Brunswick senator. I'm not just a St. John senator. I'm a New Brunswick senator. More importantly, I'm a Canadian senator. And you just raise your eyes and say, what's to the national good? And I will say one more thing about what I'm working on. So I'm involved in the government's Bill C-5. You'll remember it's now an act for major projects and things like that. And they're putting together an oversight committee to ensure that the government ministers are exercising their powers and responsibilities and executing things properly. And that committee is going to be announced next week. And I'm hoping that you'll likely see my name on that committee. And I'm excited about that because I really believe that transportation and the transportation corridors are key to our economic success, because we're under attack right now from the United States, from trade, from various angles. And we have to diversify trade lanes. We have to diversify trading partners. And it's our supply chains that are so essential. And there's hardly anybody in this room who's not part of that story. And so we need to make sure that we remain resilient, that we diversify, and that we win this battle. And so I'm excited to be part of that.
I think we'll all take great comfort knowing that you're part of that. So that'll be exciting. So kind of an overarching final question. What is looking back on your career? We did this with Andy in the podcast as well. What are some of your big reflections? And I know you're not done. You got lots of energy and passion, and you're going to do great things. But to date, what are some of the reflections and biggest points of pride of your career?
Gee, I think the most disappointing part was I had an injury on board a ship that took me off the ships because I wanted to be a harbor pilot in St. John, like my dad and my uncle. I had an accident, lost some of the vision in my eye, and had to find another path. Everything happens for a reason. And the other path took me through the Coast Guard, had a great career in Coast Guard. I think the turning point for me was when I went to Privy Council office and learned about how government works. I worked in a place called machinery of government. If it sounds boring, it can be, but it gets into the nuts and bolts of how government operates. And I was fortunate to be there. And I think the next highlight for me was I went back to school, became an accountant, and became I was the first chief financial officer in the Department of Indian and Northern Affairs. And I became one of two who were responsible, working for the Comptroller General, to bring that concept across government. And then I think the next big achievement was coming to Port St. John. I mean, this was the dream. It was unbelievable. I told you, I used to drive across and look and say, I hope someday I have that opportunity. And, the man upstairs had a plan for me, and here I am, after having spent 11 years here. And I must say, one of the highlights of being here, fantastic people. I look around, I'm not going to say the usual things because they say, oh my God, here he goes. But I guess I'm looking at a fellow sitting next to me, and I was so excited and proud of Craig's accomplishment of becoming the youngest CEO, not just in Canada, but I'm going to argue in North America, of a major port, and he's leading a growing port like no other CEO is doing that. And I would say that our friend who's retiring from down in the Port of LA would agree with that. And because you're doing phenomenal work here, and for a guy who is not yet 40, is just, you've done a special job. That's been a highlight of my career too, meeting you and seeing you succeed.
Well, I'm going to end on that note because I think what you see, the passion that Jim brings, and something that we've talked a lot about in other podcasts, the secret sauce to the Port of St. John is the people that we've got engaged, the relationships we built, the fun that we've had. We keep being told by shipping lines and rail lines and operators we're the preferred port. Well, that's because we know how to build relationships. We know how to find mentors. We know how to bring good new people in, and you are certainly the personification of that. So thank you for coming here today.
Can I say one more thing?
Absolutely, yeah.
This card here is an important card. And so, there's about 150 people or something like that here. This organization does such great work in the background that not a lot of people know about. And it's so wonderful that they do what they do. And just think if every one of us just kind of did this code and put $20 towards them. I'm encouraging you to do that, 20, 30, whatever you can do, but do something because these folks need that support to keep that operation going. It's a totally self-funded operation through donations, and I'm encouraging you to do that.
He never misses a sales opportunity. You got to love it. Thank you.